Hey everyone, welcome to the reading of all the updates from Chapter 4 to D's Journal. Before we start, I want to bring mention to Altinus' journal, which we got for defeating Altinus, of course. This is going to be its own separate video that'll be going up alongside this one, so if you want to hear that, then go to that video. This is just going to be all things mainly in notes, so let's get started. An update to Ring a Bell. The Dark Knight's helm was knocked to the ground, revealing a face identical to mine. He went overboard moments later. Despite the shock I felt, something clicked in my mind. Tiz retrieved a journal that appeared the same as the one I carry. Just then, the ship began to shake more violently. As we returned to the bridge, we were bathed in bright light. An update to Tiz. We awakened the 4 crystals and approached the Holy Pillar as Eri had bid us. A deadly struggle took place when we were attacked by the Dark Knight. Upon our victory, I caught a glimpse of his face. As I stood confused in shock, Grandship began to shake, and we were enveloped in light. Updates to Agnes. After awakening the Earth Crystal, the Holy Pillar appeared. Led by Eri, we breached the pillar aboard Grandship to begin the ritual to seal the chasm. The Dark Knight intercepted us under orders from Brave the Templar, but we bested him. I caught a glimpse of his face. It mirrored mine, and he carried the same journal. Confusion followed, then we were taken by the light. After an epic battle, Lord De Rosso showed us a painting of the angel that had descended during his last battle with the sage. It was a spitting image of Agnes. The angel told of the coming of the Evil One, who would lead the Vestals astray. A great chasm would herald its coming. It seems the angel's omens had set the wheels of fate turning for all of us. Updates to Edea. We visited Edea's mother, where she was receiving treatment, and she welcomed us despite knowing we accompanied the Wind Vestal. It seems the people of Eternia, including Edea's mother, were sustained by white magic cables linked to the Earth Crystal. Torn between her convictions and her humanity, Edea bravely pushed us to proceed with the awakening. Beyond the eastern passage from the city, we find an abandoned village littered with gravestones. An old man there who continued to tend the graves told us the village was the birthplace of Edea's parents. After defeating Victor and Victoria, we set out for the top floor of Central Command, but were put to sleep by a strange bat-like creature. Edea was taken to another room, while the rest of us were locked in the dungeon. After speaking to her father, Edea came to our rescue, using a secret passage in the room she had used as a child. Edea followed through with her convictions and defeated her own father. She then faced cutting short the life of her mother. Lord De Rosa arrived in time to save the wounded brave. He said the Templar had advanced medicine by 100 years, and with a soft laugh, told Edea her mother would not perish if the crystal were awakened. We entered the Holy Pillar, but as Eri began to meditate, the deck started shaking. The Dark Knight had come to do battle with us at the Templar's behest. A desperate struggle ensued, but we emerged victorious. Altinus Dim lost his helm in the melee, revealing a face identical to mine. He then fell from the ship. Before we could take stock of the situation, a light enveloped us. Before leaving, Edea asked how Lord De Rosso and Sage Juliana could forgive the Templar for rising in revolt. Lord De Rosso explained the bond of trust between the Sage, the Templar, and him, and how the Templar had acted in the interests of the people of the world. An update to Eri. With the awakening of the Earth Crystal at Everlast Tower, we had unleashed the power of all 4 crystals on this world. The Holy Pillar appeared as Eri foretold, and she went to a state of meditation to perform a final rite that would close the Great Chasm and save the world from darkness. After fending off an attack by the Dark Knight, we were enveloped in a bright light. An update to Barris the Monk. Records show that he served as a trainee soldier in the unit that attacked the Orthodoxy's head temple when the Templar rose up 15 years ago. Update to Holly. Records show that she served as a junior medic in the unit that occupied Eternia in the Templar's uprising 15 years ago. Update to Hankel. Records show that he commanded the unit that attacked the Orthodoxy's head temple when the Templar rose up 15 years ago. Updates to Sage Juliana. Stuck behind bars at Eternian Central Command, and at our wits' end, we were paid a visit by the Sage. It revealed he was a founder of the organization that preceded the Duchy, making him our enemy. We were all shocked. The Sage told a wavering Agnes that her actions could bring misfortune to many, and asked us if we would still press on knowing this. We answered that we would. After contemplating this, the Sage broke us out of the prison, then disappeared. In Everlast Tower, we find a passage that mentioned the Sage amongst the records discussing the Templar's uprising 15 years ago. It appears that before the uprising, the Templar and the Sage held a fierce debate over 3 days and nights. As we gazed upon a battlefield landscape on the 5th floor of Vampire Castle, Lord DeRosso shared a surprising secret regarding the Sage. It seems the Sage was the High Inquisitor of the Crystal Orthodoxy, born 1900 years ago. He fought many battles against Lord DeRosso, who led the forces of darkness, and in the end, achieved a triumphant victory. While viewing the portrait of the Archbishop on the 6th floor of Vampire Castle, Lord DeRosso told us of the Sage's actions when he was made Archbishop. It seems he worked to diminish the power of the Orthodoxy and shield the Vestals and the faithful from its corruption. As we looked upon the Asterisk painting on the top floor of Vampire Castle, Lord DeRosso told us how the Sage deprived the Orthodoxy of the power to grant vocations, and sealed away a cache of weapons of forbidden power that the Orthodoxy had seized from around the world. After defeating Lord DeRosso on the top floor of Vampire Castle, he showed us the angel painting. He spoke of the angel that descended upon his last battle with the Sage at Narende, and how they both heard many terrible secrets regarding the crystals before the wounded angel relinquished her life. Lord DeRosso told us of why he and the Sage forgave the Templar for the uprising and helped his daughter. Before they could prepare for the Great Chasm, the Orthodoxy began planning the Great Ritual, which would place enormous strain on the crystals. The Templar proposed to protect the Earth Crystal, and the Sage and DeRosso sanctioned his assault on the head temple. As Ari began to meditate at the Holy Pillar, an impact shook the deck. It seems the Dark Knight has been ordered by the Templar to attack us, and was waiting for his chance. As he met his tragic end, the face of Altinus Dim was revealed, and was like looking into a mirror. Then, Grandship shook violently, and we were surrounded by light before we could talk. Update to Profiteer. In Everlast Tower, we found a diary recording the events of the Templar's uprising 15 years ago. It seems Profiteer was charged with overseeing the seizure of the assets in the Orthodoxy's head temple. He was later suspected of accepting bribes from Orthodoxy officials and misappropriating works of art, indicating he had been corrupt for some time. An update to Kint. At Everlast Tower, we found a diary detailing the events of the Templar's uprising 15 years ago. It mentioned that Sigma Kint was a commander of the Eternian occupation forces. An update to Victoria. As Adia stood before Eternian Central Command deep in thought, we were ambushed by Victor and Victoria. They pelted us with fierce magic, and we were on the verge of annihilation. At the last minute, Victoria had another seizure, and they retreated into Central Command. We pursued Victoria into the white magic circulation hub to the right of Central Command, and found her inside a gigantic heart-like vessel, immersed in solution. It turns out she has had an incurable illness since she was a child, causing her to be shunned. She came to the attention of the Templar, who brought her to Eternia for treatment. Although the treatment keeps Victoria alive, she now suffers from violent seizures, and is unable to control her emotions. As Victor told us of her sad upbringing, Victoria woke and set upon us. After a frenzied battle, we were finally able to defeat them both. An update to Victor. We were ambushed by Victor and Victoria on Eternian Central Command. Victoria held magic of intense power, and we thought our end was near. However, she had another seizure, and they retreated into Central Command. We pursued Victoria into the white magic circulation hub at Central Command, and found her immersed in a solution receiving treatment. Victor began talking about the past to buy time. It seems that after contracting an incurable disease, she was taken in by the Templar, at which point Victor began her treatment. Although the treatment kept Victoria alive, she suffered from violent seizures, and was unable to control her emotions. When Victor finished telling us of her past, Victoria awoke and attacked us. After a frenzied battle, we finally defeated them both. Victor's name appeared in the research notes we found at Everlast Tower. They seem to be from some time after the Earth Crystal was seized 15 years ago. The notes indicate that he dedicated much time to study of the crystal. In Everlast Tower, we found Victor's name on a troop deployment list for the campaign to retake Eternia. It seems he accompanied a Vincent S. Court, who must have been his father. An update to Einherja. According to documents we found at Everlast Tower, Einherja took part in the Templar's uprising 15 years ago. They paint a picture of her as a young trainee who bravely patrolled her home city of Eternia, protecting the people and her master's training hall. An update to Fiora de Rosa. According to documents we found at Everlast Tower, the Red Mage de Rosa took part in the Templar's uprising 15 years ago. It seems he served as an aide to the Knight Argent Henkel in the unit that assaulted the head temple of the Orthodoxy. However, Henkel grew mistrustful of him after his poor conduct. He was apparently also close to the salve maker Kada and Chairman Profiteer. An update to Kam Yazumi. In Everlast Tower, we found documents showing that the Swordmaster took part in the Templar's uprising 15 years ago. He commanded the force that assaulted the Temple of Earth, showing how much faith the Templar placed in him. An update to Kata. According to documents we found in Everlast Tower, Kata joined the Templars' uprising 15 years ago. It seems he was charged with auditing the Orthodoxy's forbidden tomes and secret tonics after the assault on their head temple. The document suggests there were some unsavory rumors regarding his work. Brave the Templar, Grand Marshal, leader of the Eternian forces and head of the Council of Six. He seized the Earth Crystal 15 years ago. Edea is his daughter. A 45-year-old man from Eternia. His name is Brave Lee, and he carries the Templar Asterisk. He is valiant, judicious, and stern. A staunch supporter of anti-crystalism, the future of the duchy and the world around it are never far from his mind. Likes, Hot Pot. Dislikes, the Archduke. After several confrontations between Edea and her father, we fought him head-on. When the Templar slumped to his knees, it was Lord DeRosa who came to his aid. Edea agonized over whether to awaken the Earth Crystal and put her mother's life at risk as well. Lord DeRosa said she underestimated her father's accomplishments, and her mother would not perish. Near the Eastern Passage, we found a village littered with gravestones. We spoke to an old man who tends the graves, who said this was the village where the Templar and his wife were born. The Great Plague struck soon after they left, and they apparently deeply regretted being unable to do anything to save their hometown. In Everlast Tower, we found documents relating to the Orthodoxy. A young cleric had proposed a way to save the people from the Great Plague, but left the Orthodoxy after he was ignored. Several years later, the same cleric attacked the head temple of the Orthodoxy. The Earth Vessel was dragged out and slain by his guards. This young cleric was probably Brave Lee. In Everlast Tower, we found documents listing the forces that joined the uprising 15 years ago. They detailed some of the events of that time, indicating that the Templar and Sage Jorjana argued right up to the uprising, and noting that rebel forces marched on Eternia via Ansheim and Eisenberg. They also showed that the Templar wanted himself to be known as an usurper. Following an intense battle with Lord DeRosa, Edea asked why he and the Sage would help the Templar after his revolt. It seems that as the Angel's omens came to be, the Orthodoxy held a grand ritual that placed great strain on the crystals. With DeRosa and the Sage busy preparing for the coming Great Chasm, the Templar rose up alone to defend the crystals. Maz Erli, Brave's wife. Wife of Brave the Templar and mother to Edea. She was born frail and fell ill when Edea was an infant. A 40-year-old woman from Eternia. She speaks kindly and openly with all, and takes part in many charitable causes. She stays out of politics, and is a good wife and mother to her family. Likes, time with her family. Dislikes, IV drips, and her own frailty. Soon after arriving in Eternia, we learned from an old friend of Edea that her mother was ill, and receiving treatment. We rushed to her side, and were greeted as friends of her daughter, despite her recognizing the Vestal. Edea shared the details of our journey with her mother, who told us not to worry about her before leaving. In a village strewn with gravestones beyond the Eastern Passage, we spoke to an old man who tends the graves. He said this is where the Templar and his wife were born, and told us the Great Plague struck soon after they left to get married. When they returned, they seemed to regret being unable to do anything to save the village. The Templar fell to his knees, and Edea's mother ran to his side after being brought in by Lord DeRosa. Edea despaired at the thought of putting her mother's life at risk. However, Lord DeRosa said the Templar had advanced science and medicine in Eternia by 100 years, and her mother would not die even if the Earth Crystal were awakened. In Everlast Tower, we found records regarding the Templar's family. In the few months between the Templar's uprising and the return after establishing the duchy, Edea and her mother apparently lived in the Sage's needleworks. With the sigils on the bunk bed, they were etched by the Templar to protect his daughter, or carved by Mazer to pray for her husband's return. Lord DeRosa, the Archduke. Though Archduke of Eternia, he prefers the title Lord DeRosa. He is a man of mystery, with haunted, weary eyes. Lord DeRosa's swift treatment of the Templar saved his life. He allayed Edea's concerns about now putting her mother's life at risk, as she prepared to awaken the Earth Crystal, saying the Templar's work had advanced medicine in Eternia by 100 years, so awakening the Earth Crystal would not endanger her mother. He also hinted at a secret surrounding the crystals. We heard a surprising tale while viewing a family portrait at Lord DeRosa's castle. Lord DeRosa says he was born 2,400 years ago. He was the eldest son of the Ducal House DeRosa, a noble family of the Kingdom of Eternia that collapsed after the birth of the Crystal Orthodoxy. A reformation took place after calls to reclaim the crystals from those in power and administer them under a unified religion. The Royal House of Eternia passed the Earth Crystal on to the Orthodoxy, and the young cleric DeRosa was made a cardinal. However, he was forced out after refusing to help rig the election of the Grand Patriarch. On the orders of the fraudulently elected Grand Patriarch, the Kingdom of Eternia was invaded by forces from various lands. DeRosa's father was put to death, and the castle of House DeRosa was besieged. Its well was poisoned, and his mother slain when she was sent out as a condition of surrender. The castle fell, enveloped in flames. As the fire raged, Lord DeRosa heard a voice. "Accept me, and I shall grant life everlasting. Thou shalt have all eternity to wreak vengeance upon thine enemies." His body was never found, and he became immortal. In the 500 years that followed, he slew many key figures in the Orthodoxy, including the Grand Patriarch. To regain the power they once had, they turned to the tactic of fear-mongering. With the young warrior Juliana as their High Inquisitor, they eliminated their enemies one by one. The battle between the shadowy Lord DeRosa and the High Inquisitor is said to have continued until Juliana was 100 years old. 1800 years ago, the conflict between Lord DeRosa and High Inquisitor Juliana came to an end. Juliana struck DeRosa down, and in recognition of this, he became the first counter to be made Archbishop. He set about purging evil and corruption from the Orthodoxy, supported by Lord DeRosa from the shadows. Lord DeRosa, an immortal man from Eternia, holder of the vampire Asterisk. Lamenting his undying form, he trained hard to master arts that seemed to fit his situation. Vincent S. Court, researcher? As one who joined the Templars' uprising 15 years ago, he proposed the construction of the white magic cables to the city of Eternia. It is thought he was some kind of researcher. His age and birthplace are not known. Vincent's name appeared as the author of a report on alchemical life that we discovered in Everlast Tower. He found a tome entitled Alchemical Life among the forbidden volumes seized from the Orthodoxy, and verified that it was not a book of occult theory or miracles. However, he later advised his superiors to shut down the research, as it had led to unstable results. Among documents we found in Everlast Tower, Vincent's name was mentioned in relation to the Templars' uprising of 15 years earlier. It seems he was the one that proposed the construction of white magic cables on Eternia. His son's name is Victor. It seems he was the father of Victor S. Court. An update to Nerende Village. Nerende Battle Wastes. The final battle between dark and light took place 1800 years ago here on the Nerende Heights deep within the mountains. The Orthodoxy's forces led by Sage Juliana clashed so fiercely with Lord DeRosa's forces of dark that the very peaks of the mountains were obliterated before an angel descended from the heavens to intervene. An update to the Harina region. Desertification. According to Lord DeRosa, the Harina region was once temperate and lush with vegetation, but a great battle he waged against Sage Juliana 1800 years ago commenced the region's decline into a desert waste, which in turn led to the fall of the Harina dynasty. The name Harina is all that remains. Updates to the Juliana region. The land grant. This land was granted to Juliana upon his victory against Lord DeRosa and his shadowy forces, while the sage was still High Inquisitor of the Crystal Orthodoxy. It has ever since been known as Juliana Woods. After he left the Orthodoxy and retired to his verdant depths, no outside power or authority reaches these woods. The Uprising. Before Brave the Templar launched a surprise attack on the Orthodoxy's head temple 15 years ago, he mustered his forces here in this land. His wife remained here with young Adia, praying for the Templar's safe return. An update to Mount Fragmentum. The rending of Mount Fragmentum. The rift that tore the mountain asunder and opened up a pass between Florum and Juliana Woods. The rift that tore the mountain asunder and opened a pass between Florum and Juliana Woods was the result of the fierce battle between Lord DeRosa and Sage Juliana waged against one another 1800 years ago. City of Eternia. White magic cables connect to the city's medical facilities, and through them flow the healing waves that have made it possible to banish death by sickness. Grave-marked village. Countless grave markers line the earth here in this abandoned village, along the East Passage. Adia's parents are born here, but it was wiped out after the Orthodoxy forsook it during the Great Plague. Eternian Central Command. The headquarters of the Eternian forces is accessible through 3 passages from the city of Eternia. It was formerly the head temple of the Orthodoxy, the religion's most sacred place, until the Templars stormed it 15 years ago. The Last Bastion. Eternian Central Command stands guard over Everlast Tower, once known as the Temple of Earth. In addition to the leadership of the Eternian forces, Central Command also houses the chambers of the Council of Six, the highest governing body of Eternia. Everlast Tower. Once known as the Temple of Earth, it houses the Earth Crystal. Seized by the Templar 15 years ago, it was fitted with cables by the researchers who came with him. White Magic Cables. Duchy researchers have attached a variety of cables and equipment to the Earth Crystal to extract its power. This healing energy is transmitted through the cables to the city of Eternia, where it is used to heal people suffering from sickness and disease. The Grand Ritual. Performed 15 years ago by the top clergy of the Orthodoxy, along with the Earth Vestal, this ritual taxed the crystal to its limit. By the time the Templars stormed the Temple of Earth, the crystal had already begun to spiral out of control. In a last-ditch effort to channel the dangerously powerful energy away from the temple, the Templar ordered white magic cables be attached to the crystal. And so it is said the crystal's energy began to be used for healing purposes. Vampire Castle. Looming along the West Passage, this castle is feared as the haunt of a powerful vampire. We got a bunch of research notes from Everlast Tower. I came across a bundle of ancient-looking papers in the halls of Everlast Tower, penned by a researcher as the Temple of Earth was being rebuilt into the tower that stands now. Observations of the crystal, submitted by Victor S. Court. There among its pages, I found a familiar name. The energy within the crystals may be categorized by their names, namely fire, water, wind, and earth. The amplification effect of a crystal only extends to its corresponding element. For instance, the efficacy of this crystal extends to soil, land, mud, rock, and the like. It is for that reason the Orthodoxy names this the Earth Crystal. As for the method of extracting the energy it holds within, he must have been young when he wrote this report. Even then, he had a passion for the crystals. Obsession, really. Strong enough to cause even Anias, Vestal of Wind, to entertain the possibility that desecration of the crystals might indeed serve some good. A second research report. It's missing a considerable number of pages, but appears to be a continuation of the other. The healing waves emanating from the crystal, submitted by Victor S. Court. Healing Wave Research Part 1. Two kinds of waves have been observed emanating from the Earth Crystal. The waves that amplify white magic efficacy were likely used by the Orthodoxy for benediction, healing, and exorcism. The waves that amplify black magic efficacy were likely used for retribution and attacks upon enemies of the faith. Healing Wave Research Part 2. The Lord Marshal ordered that only those waves that amplify white magic are to be extracted and utilized. A new technique when an extraction cable is attached to the surface of the crystal without doing it harm has greatly advanced our work. If this report is to be believed, it was never the Duchy, or perhaps I should say the Templars' intention to utilize these energies for military purposes, but rather to exercise the utmost care in preserving the crystal while putting it to use combating diseases and easing the people's suffering. The third still legible research document in the stack looks to have been written around the same time as the others, but the handwriting is different, more mature. Interim Report on Alchemical Life Research, submitted by Vincent S. Court. Alchemical Life Research Part 1. A tome entitled Alchemical Life was found among a trove of forbidden volumes seized from the Orthodoxy, but rather than some book of the occult dealing in miracles and manifestations, it is an ancient book of medicine. It claims the crystal's white waves can stimulate an individual's cells, and the black waves can link cells between individuals. Alchemical Life Research Part 2. This so-called alchemical life is unstable, and keeping the resulting subjects alive comes at great difficulty. This willingness to cast aside his research only furthers my amazement at the sincerity and zeal shown by the Templar and all the Duchy researchers in the pursuit of medical science. I came upon a pile of badly worn papers lying in a forgotten corner of Everlast Tower. They appear to be the journal of a high official within the Orthodoxy. The oldest legible entry dates 20 years back, the newest 15, written the day of the Templar strike on the Orthodoxy's head temple. The Great Plague 1. The terrible plague ravaging the world finally reached our shores. Already there are those falling ill in villages to the east. The halt had spread to the Orthodoxy's headquarters. Top officials of the faith have closed all roads and forbidden the influx of people and goods. Controversy arose when a young cleric appealed to his superiors to use the power of the Earth Crystal for purification and medical treatment. The Great Plague 2. But the proposal had no hope of approval, as we hold the crystals as sacred. The hierarchy ignored it. Refugees seeking to thwart the blockade were slain on sight, but the Orthodoxy claimed the dead were not victims, but martyrs. I care to read no further. Between missing pages and text too worn to be legible, the next entry I can read is dated significantly later. The End of the Plague 1. The young cleric appealed to his superiors day after day to no avail. When the Great Plague showed signs of abating, the orthodoxy was overjoyed, and those who had advocated the road blockade were showered with praise. Some days later, the young cleric was summoned before the Vestal, whereupon he was mocked and reprimanded for hours on end. The end of the plague too. The plague has wiped out his village of birth, save for a few who escaped, and there are many other villages throughout the faith's land that suffered the same fate. Henceforth, the young cleric was never seen again amongst the ranks of the Crystal Orthodoxy. Perhaps he was shipped to a post of no consequence, or left altogether. Even beyond the pages where, most of the text is redacted in heavy black ink. Whether this is the writer's own doing or not, I cannot say. The next clear page is the last, dated far later. It provides a record of that day, 15 years ago. The text is a frantic scribble, as if written amid utter chaos. The end of the world won. The Orthodoxy's head temple has already fallen, and shall not be long now before my refuge, too, is discovered by the invaders. The Earth Vestal was dragged before their leader. It was the once young cleric, now a seasoned soldier, fearless and self-assured. The end of the world, too. The Vestal faced him, hurling words of contempt and scorn, but ere she could finish, an enraged member of his guard cut her down in one fell swoop, and the Vestal's lifeless body fell silently to the floor. It was an account of the Earth Vestal's execution at the hands of the Templar's men 15 years ago. I had no idea he had so long plied his case as a priest within the Orthodoxy. I imagine her dying words were an accusation of betrayal. Idia's expression clouded especially upon hearing mention of the Templar's aid cutting the Vestal down. I know not why. The recapture of Eternia. Other records found in Everlast Tower paint a picture of the assault, describing the Templar's force that struck Eternia. Several of the names it mentions are familiar, leaders of the Eternian forces we've defeated. The Reconquest Campaign. Troop deployments. Reconquest Campaign 1. Our uprising was lacking in everything. Troops, armaments, cultivation of informants within the Orthodoxy, but the Crystal Orthodoxy would soon put their plans in motion. The debate between our Lord Templar and the Sage continued. For 3 days and 3 nights, the debate raged on, whereupon our Lord Templar gave the order to strike. His family was to remain behind in this land. Reconquest Campaign 2. We departed before sunrise the next day. We procured weapons and ammunition in Ansheim and then slipped secretly into Eisenberg. From northern Eisenberg, 3 fortified airships took us across the highlands, at last entering the land of Eternia. Reconquest Campaign 3. An abridged listing of our main invasion forces follows. The valiant usurper braved the Templar. Our Lord Templar insisted we name him a usurper. Assault troops for the Temple of Earth. They are to take the Earth Crystal and protect our Crystal Technology Squad. Swordmaster Nobutsu Kami Izumi, Commander. Heiren Barbarossa, Lieutenant Commander. Dr. Vincent S. Court, Technology Squad Leader, accompanied by his 10-year-old son serving as his assistant. Assault troops for the Orthodoxy's head temple. They are to halt all the institution's functions and seize all of its forbidden tomes and assets. Sir Argent Henkel, Commander. Fiora de Rosa, Lieutenant Commander. Bear Slayer, Officer in Training. Erotus Profiter and Dr. Kata as Auditors. Occupation forces for the city of Eternia. These troops will be assigned to keeping the peace and preparing for the laying of the cables. Sigma Kint, Commander. And Hiria Venus as his Officer in Training. Holly White as a Medic in Training. Seems this was penned by the leader of the force that took the Orthodoxy's head temple, now Eternian Central Command. Hard to believe the same man went on to captain the Sky Knights. The text is written in a heavy hand, almost carved into the vellum. Head Temple Occupation, Sir Argent Henkel, Commander. Head Temple Occupation Memo 1. Once the Temple of Earth fell and news of the Earth Vestal's demise reached the remaining resistance at the Head Temple, they quickly surrendered. The Orthodoxy soldiers and leaders were stripped of their weapons and confined to the temple. The Lord Templar had strictly forbade us from rampant slaughter and maltreatment of the vanquished. None have yet disobeyed this order. Head Temple Occupation Memo 2. Those sympathetic to our cause were allowed to join us, while those who refuse are to be released. As for Erotus Profiter, the man sent to the treasure house to seize the Orthodoxy's assets, unsavory rumors about him soon began to circulate. An investigation has begun to allegations of bribery by former Orthodoxy officials and the large-scale disappearance of Orthodoxy-owned artwork from the treasure house. Head Temple Occupation Memo 3. Dr. Kata, who has been tasked with deciphering the Orthodoxy's forbidden spells, is continuing with his clandestine meetings with my Lieutenant De Rosa. In comparison, the simple enthusiasm of Barrett's lair for more fighting is almost refreshing to see. The next report was penned by the leader of the squad that occupied Eternia. The Templar's decision to staff it with Eternian natives shows a sensitivity to the people of the city. The occupation of the city, Commander Sigma Kint. Eternian Occupation Journal 1. A month has passed since our bloodless occupation of the city of Eternia, and the people are finally beginning to settle into their daily lives. Einherja, who was originally from this city, continues to doggedly patrol its streets saying, "I shall defend the city that is home to my master's training ground." The occupation force is also comprised of others from this land, and perhaps that is another reason for the easing of the people's fears. Eternian Occupation Journal 2. A few days prior, it was announced that this land had been rechristened the Duchy of Eternia. A member of the royal bloodline that once ruled Eternia before the Crystal Orthodoxy was restored to power as Archduke. And naming himself Grand Marshal of the Eternian forces, the Lord Templar began his tireless effort to build a new system of government. Eternian Occupation Journal 3. When Dr. Vincent S. Court proposed a great feat of engineering be erected in one corner of the city, it was approved at once. Great cables are to be extended from the Temple of Earth all the way to the city, but I know not their purpose. The decreed construction schedule is extremely tight, and will doubtless require additional laborers from among the people and former Orthodoxy members. Eternian Occupation Journal 4. I spotted medic in training Holly White being scolded by Victor, a boy of the same age, for standing around and watching the construction. Reading these reports, it sounds like the Templar's men did right by the city, with no looting or abuse. The Vampire Gallery. Family. The Vampire Gallery 1. We traveled the world collecting keystones as Lord De Rosso bid, and have now finally gained entry to Vampire Castle. The Vampire Gallery 2. The castle interior is heavy with silence, and a chill to put the snows outside to shame fills its halls. The halls are lined with a host of solemn paintings. The room before the stairway houses a particularly large work, depicting a man nearly identical to Lord De Rosso, and a woman, likely the man's wife, a babe held in her arms. The Vampire Gallery 3. The family painting, it seems, depicts Lord De Rosso shortly after his birth. The couple portrayed are his parents. Just as Ines questioned a passage in the inscription saying clergyman of the Crystal Adventists and cardinal of the Crystal Orthodoxy, Lord De Rosso appeared to explain. Family 1. Lord De Rosso was born some 2400 years ago, in an era when, as the inscription suggests, the Old Faith and the Orthodoxy both existed. According to him, Idia's father, the Templar, did not found Eternia 15 years ago, but rather revived a kingdom that had existed 2.5 millennia prior. Family 2. At the time, this land was a hub of international trade blessed with 4 seasons. Eternia's king took the Earth Crystal and the Crystal Adventists under his aegis, and peace reigned for generations. Family 3. At Eternia's west stood the ancestral castle of the De Rosso clan, a line of dukes descended of royal blood, who had long enjoyed a close bond with the ruling family. The court treated the De Rosso family kindly, and the Dukes De Rosso gave their fealty in return. The Vampire Gallery 4. All of the paintings in Vampire Castle, including the family portrait, were painted by Lord De Rosso himself, he explained. Strangely, that was the least surprising part of his revelation. The original paintings had been lost in a fire, and, bored with his immortal existence, he had taken to painting while reminiscing about the old days. The Vampire Gallery 5. The hall leading to the 3rd floor housed another large painting, this time of a figure in colorful vestments, a record of Lord De Rosso's investiture as a cardinal of the Orthodoxy. This time, he appeared before us with a momentary smile before speaking on his youth and the whims of fate that shaped the course of his life. Ordainment 1. Born of royal blood into the De Rosso clan, he grew up loved by his parents, the people, and even the king himself. A blessed childhood. At 19, the king recommended him for priesthood among the Crystal Adventists, now known as the Old Faith. He took the cloth and worked tirelessly for the faith, the king, and the good of the people. Ordainment 2. For shortly after that, a new faction rose to power within the Adventist ranks. They proposed that the world's 4 crystals not be placed under the stewardship of disparate kings and leaders, but brought under the aegis of a central body, a new faith. It was the birth of the Orthodoxy. Ordainment 3. The Eternian king, who had long guarded the Earth Crystal, was quick to support this new movement. Perhaps due to the king's warm support, Lord de Rosa was made a cardinal of the Orthodoxy, a position of considerable power. Ordainment 4. As the transformation of Adventism into Orthodoxy concluded, only the election of a Grand Patriarch remained. The cardinals gathered to hold a conclave. Shortly after it began, however, Lord de Rosa was approached by another offering a deal in exchange for his vote. Ordainment 5. Still in its first days, the new faith had already succumbed to the taint of corruption. Lord de Rosa rebuffed the offer, and within 4 short months of the Patriarch's election secured by bribery and collusion, he had been driven out of the office of cardinal. Ordainment 6. Old Faith and Orthodoxy, Kingdom of Eternia and Duchy. Faced with a flurry of terms, Tis and Adia seemed lost. When Agnes explained that the Adventists succumbed to the rise of the Orthodoxy due to the greater truth of the latter's teachings, Lord de Rosa offered a patient, somehow melancholy rebuttal. Ordainment 7. History's victors are given to heaping derision upon the losers in order to solidify their position as just and true. Those who held power in the Orthodoxy preached the ills of Adventism, shaping the records of the era in their desired image. In time, the voices of the Adventists were silenced entirely, lost to posterity forever. Ordainment 8. By Lord de Rosa's account, the fierce battle between the Adventists and Orthodoxy did not take place before the Orthodoxy's rise, as history suggests, but after the world had already been unified under the Orthodoxy's banner. I should know, he claimed, for I was there to fight it. His smile was wry and cold as ice. Ordainment 9. It seems the timing of the conflict, the notion that it arose from unilateral aggression on the part of the Adventists, and that it concluded in the decisive victory of the Orthodoxy, are all fabrications. The transition from old faith to new, he claims, was actually a peaceful, bloodless process, the likes of which history has seldom seen. The Vampire Gallery 6. The hall before the 4th floor entrance bears a painting of the castle bathed in fire, surrounded by a vast army. The western corridor, the second castle burning in the distance. It bore an uncanny resemblance to the castle in which we now stood, but Lord de Rosa appeared once again to correct our false assumptions. The Vampire Gallery 7. The distant castle, he explained, was that of Eternia's king, while the burning structure at the fore was his own ancestral home, the castle of the Clan de Rosa. Just what had transpired in this land that day? The Siege 1. The kingdom of Eternia, it seems, fell to a sudden invasion. Reports reached the Grand Patriarch's chambers that Eternia was agitating for a return to the old faith, that it was amassing armies to strike the Orthodoxy down. In response, a force was gathered from the world's nations, the process so swift and smooth it almost appeared pre-planned. The Siege 2. The royal palace fell after only half a month's siege. The royal family was slaughtered to the last, together with many of their subjects. The same king who had so readily accepted the Orthodoxy and turned over the temple to them and met his end at their hands. This revelation struck Adia dumb, and all of us, really. The Siege 3. Lord de Rosa and his parents took shelter in their home, joined by relations and commoners alike. When a messenger from the king came begging aid, Lord de Rosa's father gathered a force and rode to save his king. In truth, the royal palace had already fallen, the messenger a fake. He died in battle in the central passage. The Siege 4. Soon after the palace fell, the Orthodoxy turned to the de Rosa home. Poison was cast into the water supply, and the siege force was packed tight beyond hope of escape. Only women, children, the old, and injured remained within. Lord de Rosa surrendered, sending his own mother as a hostage in accordance with the Orthodoxy's demands. The Siege 5. But the siege did not break. Those family members and commoners who had followed Lord de Rosa began to waste away. As starvation began to claim them, one after the next, a letter arrived. Its author was the cardinal, who had propositioned Lord de Rosa at the conclave, the man now leading the siege. Siege 6. It claimed no surrender would be accepted, and that his mother had been slain. It was Lord de Rosa who then put his own home to the blaze. The lofty precepts of the Orthodoxy, it seems, are a hollow hypocrisy. We were all struck silent. When at last Adia noted a similarity to the events of the Great Plague, Lord de Rosa nodded. The Vampire Gallery 8. Before the stairs leading to the 5th floor hung a painting of immortality. The question was on all of our minds. How had he survived? Tis was the first to give it voice, and Lord de Rosa began his explanation. Immortality 1. Surrounded by the Orthodoxy's force, family and countrymen slaughtered at their hands, Lord De Rosso set his own home ablaze. Just as the flames encircled him, he felt something enter his body. Betrayed by that in which he had believed and robbed of those he had loved, he prepared to enter death's embrace, bereft of all save his own despair. Immortality 2. But as his consciousness began to fade, he claims he heard a voice. Accept me, and I shall grant a life everlasting. Though it shall be filled with grief, thou shalt have all eternity to wreak vengeance upon thine enemies. Immortality 3. The source of that voice remains a mystery to him, even now. When his body could not be found among the remains, the Orthodoxy panicked. To justify their actions, they branded Lord De Rosso and his clan vampires, cursed to be reviled by the annals of history. Immortality 4. It seems the legends of Vampire Castle that Adir grew up on are but remnants of a slander perpetrated 2,400 years ago. The fangs, the ability to assume the form of a bat. Lord De Rosso dedicated his all across the centuries to perfecting the role the Orthodoxy had cast him in, that he might strike fear into their hearts. Immortality 5. Lord De Rosso crisply denied the established tale of the first Grand Patriarch's peaceful demise, insisting instead that the Patriarch and his aide, the Archbishop, were assassinated. He named himself their killer. His eyes a blend of mad rage and melancholy. Immortality 6. His vengeance wrought, Lord De Rosso left Eternia. He fostered relations with those who hated the Orthodoxy, those who suffered under its oppression. He styled himself a leader of the darkness that stood against it, an enemy to mankind, an accursed vampire lord. He would spend the next 5 centuries garnering infamy. Vampire Gallery 9. Before the stairs to the 6th floor, we encountered a painting of war. Lord De Rosso called it the long and hard-fought war between the Orthodoxy and we denizens of darkness, an act of vengeance played out over 500 years. The war won. 5 centuries after the Orthodoxy's rise, the world saw an age of seafaring, then of piracy. The advance of technology saw ships grow larger, navigation more refined. Trade flourished, the world cultures mingled, and the Orthodoxy's miracles were steadily replaced with scientific fact. The Grand Patriarch's power waned. The War 2. The panicked Orthodoxy set about restoring its authority through fear. Its enemies, those who might become enemies, even those merely inconvenient to the Patriarch, were branded heretics. Any who failed to flee in time were dragged before an inquisition and executed. The clash between justice and darkness spread in scale. The War 3. Using terror, the Patriarch regained his former influence. For a time. But soon enough, even that was insufficient. In a panic once more, the Orthodoxy turned to more extreme methods. A new High Inquisitor was named, a young genius of 20, of common origin, rare for the time. His name was Juliana. The War 4. A military marvel, even by Lord De Rosso's admission. Juliana had purged Eternia of the elements of darkness in the blink of an eye. In the decades that followed, he and De Rosso fought in countless battles the world over. The War 5. The scars left by their battles remain even today, some 1800 years hence. Their powers carved the massive rift the Eisenbridge spans, and split Florm's Mount Fragmentum. Their fighting transformed what was once a fertile grassland into the modern-day desert of Harina. The War 6. The final clash between them took place atop the Nerende heights of Kaldusla, the later site of the Great Chasm. I could not help but sense fate's hand in this. Their epic struggle spanned 100 days, and cut what were once mountains in the same range as Eternia's highlands in half. The War 7. For some reason, Lord De Rosso withheld the details of this final battle, but history tells that the High Inquisitor Juliana vanquished Lord De Rosso, leader of the forces of darkness, then returned triumphant to Eternia. Lord De Rosso allowed that was fact, in one strict sense. The corner of his mouth turned up into a smirk. The War 8. Lord De Rosso allowed the sage to claim victory, he explained. The bones Juliana brought back to Eternia were not De Rosso's, were not even human, in fact. When the Templars struck the Orthodoxy 15 years ago, they found Lord De Rosso's grave sealed deep beneath the head temple. He was barely able to hold back laughter as he spoke. The Vampire Gallery 10. Before reaching the 7th floor, we found another portrait. It was a sage, festooned in the gaudy vestments of an archbishop, his expression a mix of wry smile and tedium. I cannot help but marvel at Lord De Rosso's skill with a brush. Still more stunning were his words. Archbishop 1. For his victory over the Orthodoxy's nemesis, he was named its first commoner archbishop, a hollow gesture that he might live out his few remaining years in glory. Little did they know, his plot was already in motion. When Adia balked at the term, Lord de Rosso offered an explanation. Archbishop 2. The war with Lord de Rosso behind him, the sage now thought only of distancing the Vestals and the pious from the festering corruption within the Orthodoxy. After 8 decades' service, he was well aware of the organization's state and the readiness with which it turned upon its defenseless constituents. Archbishop 3. Where power gathers, so too do leeches and vipers, and the Orthodoxy had long become a noxious marsh. What had begun as a body to serve the crystals and preserve world order now worked solely to further its own corrupt existence. Archbishop 4. Left to fester, this fallen faith would soon do irrevocable harm to the Vestals and the world's people, he was certain, and so he thought to sever the source of the corruption, the power amassed within the Orthodoxy's hands. But to do this, he would need time, something he lacked after the long war with Lord de Rosso. Archbishop 5. With the ornamental title of Archbishop came one material privilege, access to the head temple's treasury and the writings sealed within it. There, he found a text, the Rite of Agelessness, and an arcane elixir of longevity beside it. Archbishop 6. Though incomplete, the sage supplemented the text with knowledge acquired in battlefields the world over. Even Lord de Rosso was shocked at how quickly Oriana perfected the method, and how readily he used it upon himself. He was 103 and an Archbishop of the Orthodoxy. He would betray all expectations by remaining both. Archbishop 7. Now free of age's grasp, the sage bade his time until the chance to cut loose the Vestals and the pious arose. The next 1700 years saw the once gentle highlands rise to prohibitive heights, severing Eternia from the outside world. It was the opportunity he had awaited. Archbishop 8. With airships not yet in existence, the Highlands' rise was enough to cut Eternia off entirely. The Earth Crystal remained in the Orthodoxy's hands, but stewardship of the crystals of fire, water, and wind reverted to their respective temples. The Vampire Gallery 11. Soon after reaching the top floor, we came upon a familiar sight. The next painting depicted a glowing stone which Lord de Rosso confirmed was an Asterisk, the same curious objects we had amassed through our victories over the Eternian forces. But what connection to the sage and Lord de Rosso do they bear? Asterisk 1. By Lord de Rosso's account, the Asterisk was the keystone of Oriana's plot to strip the Orthodoxy's power. He would steal their exclusive right to confer vocations. At this point in his explanation, Adia and his eyes glazed over. Even Agnes appeared to be struggling to understand. Asterisk 2. Lord de Rosso was quick to elucidate. Before the sage's intervention, someone seeking a job would have to acquire approval to commune with the corresponding crystal. In addition to controlling access, the Orthodoxy profited from the requisite alms given to the temples, which soon after flowed into the head temple's coffers. Asterisk 3. In this way, wealth flooded in without any effort on the Orthodoxy's part. No lofty ideal could hope to survive such an environment long, and soon any who called for reform were the targets of swift removal. The sage saw through the system, and his efforts exposed it for the fraud it was before the Grand Patriarch's very eyes. Asterisk 4. He gathered the Patriarch and other high officials together to behold the tremendous new rite he had invented. Coming from the hero who had saved the Orthodoxy from the wicked Lord de Rosso, they were all too eager to see it. His demonstration, the autonomous acquisition of the legendary vocation, without the aid of a crystal. Asterisk 5. Despite the efforts of a desperate patriarch, word of the sage's feat soon spread. Soon, the common man was rejoicing at this new discovery, and the Orthodoxy lacked the means to return the genie to its bottle. Had they but stopped the sage's demonstration, but it was too late. Oriana advanced to the next stage of his plot. Asterisk 6. The sage then presented the asterisk, proposing that vocations be mediated using the stones, under the Orthodoxy's management. Those who desired a job would secure permission from the Orthodoxy, and pay a corresponding cost. The asterisk allowed anyone to retain any job. His proposal seemed an expansion of the existing system. Asterisk 7. Blind to all but their own profits and unable to return to the previous paradigm, the officials eagerly agreed to his proposal. So great was their enthusiasm, they not only adopted the asterisks, but appointed Oriana to oversee its implementation. Asterisk 8. But the sage's actions left us puzzled. He had exposed the Orthodoxy's scheme only to supplant it with another. A smile played on Lord de Rosso's lips as he revealed the catch. The method of the asterisk's creation is known only to the sage. Apparently, even Lord de Rosso is in the dark. Asterisk 9. and so it was that the sage successfully robbed the Orthodoxy of its control over jobs. Originally, jobs were acquired through dedicated training by those who bore a natural affinity for their vocation. In order to revive that model, Juliana began to distribute jobs and abilities in secret to all who desired them, free of charge. So what are the Asterisks ultimately? Lord de Rosa suggests they are a sort of secret manual, housing within them the requisite knowledge and experience. In short, they are traditional training distilled. Perhaps, he posited, they exist now to place one in contact with the true masters of a given trade. We've met our share. Asterisk 11. But surely the Patriarch was quick to notice the lack of alms coming in. Lord de Rosa's answer was cut and dry. They did, but Juliana was long gone. He abandoned his seat as Archbishop and absconded with the forbidden arms the Orthodoxy had amassed, sealing them away in a secret location. Asterisk 12. The sage then took up hermitage in the woods, awaiting a time when all who knew of his existence had died. In addition, Lord de Rosa's efforts saw this process greatly accelerated. To think these two who had battled around the world would come to forge such a partnership, just what transpired between the two of them? Asterisk 13. Am I alone in feeling that the actions of these two men took a drastic turn following the clash in Nerende that marked the end of the warring? And Lord de Rosa's words, that the Crystal Orthodoxy requires naught but the crystals, the vestals, and the faithful. Has his desire for vengeance truly been slaked? Asterisk 14. Having completed his purge of the Orthodoxy, Lord de Rosa returned to Eternia for the first time in 7 centuries. There, he erected a castle of ice atop the ruins of his former home, and from it kept watch over the Orthodoxy. Elsewhere, the sage assisted the Vestals from his hermitage, as Agnes and the rest of us well know. The Vampire Gallery 12. Having reached the top floor of Vampire Castle and attaining a narrow victory over Lord de Rosa, we were given leave to view the final painting. Hung beyond the Lord's throne, it depicts a lone angel. The Angel 1. The angel that descended from the heavens during my final battle against Juliana, he called her. At the end of 100 days' combat, both men riddled with wounds, they prepared to bring their war to an end. As they incanted their greatest spells, the sky parted and an angel descended upon Nerende. An angel? Do such beings truly exist? The Angel 2. Both men were captivated, to the point of forgetting their rivalry entirely. They rushed to her side, tending to her battered body. She was blind and broken, half her body lost. They knew she was not long for the world. I suspect Lord de Rosa was telling us that she was human. The Angel 3. Shuddering and gasping for breath, she spent what moments remained to her in an impassioned appeal. A trap most vile. Such a fool am I, the warriors of light, if it is not too late. As she drifted in and out of consciousness, she spoke of what had befallen her, and of the dangers that now faced the world. The Angel 4. She detailed the threat facing Luxembourg, the history behind it. When Lord de Rosa confirmed the same events had transpired in his past, the angel was shocked. The clash of old and new faiths, the tragedy that struck his clan, his immortality. She spoke also of the future, of de Rosa's future, now come to pass, and of our future still ahead. The Angel 5. She warned that an evil would arise to deceive the Vestals, posing as an ally and inciting them to awaken the crystals, driving them out of control and piercing the bounds that hold this world intact. Before its coming, she foretold a sign, a great rift that sunders the earth. We were stunned. The Angel 6. The chasm was merely the last of the omens that angel foretold. The light of earth shall raise up the north, and a deathly plague shall cover all the lands. Then shall a great rift rend the earth. She spoke of the highlands' rise, and of the great plague. The Angel 7. Lord de Rosa claims her words were a revelation to him. He had dismissed the tragedy that befell him, the oppression of the old faith, as the simple products of human greed. Now, in the face of a threat to the entire world's existence, the petty power struggles surrounding the crystals came to mean something greater. The Angel 8. The dying angel's experiences pointed to a great evil capable of manipulating the crystals and the desires of man alike, or a sinister plot to tear the world from its foundations. Alas, the angel left this world before Lord de Rosa and the sage were able to learn the identity of this sour of doom. The Angel 9. Thereafter, Lord de Rosa scoured the writings of the old faith, and Juliana those of the Orthodoxy, for any mention of this evil, but their search bore no fruit. The Angel 10. Who was this angel in the end? From whence did she come? And how did she come to arrive at the scene of their battle? To these questions, Lord de Rosa could offer no answer. The only words to pass his lips were, Vestal of Wind. She bore your face. The Angel 11. The dying angel's words evinced such deep knowledge of the crystals they could only surmise she was a Vestal, or at the very least, a high official of the Orthodoxy. Among her revelations were things that even the sage and Lord de Rosso, experts in their own right, could not understand. The Angel 12. When the power of the prayer is held within a crystal dwindles, it becomes susceptible to contamination by darkness or monster kind. In that weakened state, it is unable to keep nature's wrath in check. It can only be restored to proper function by the prayers of the Vestals and the common man alike. This much is known to any cleric. The Angel 13. But what followed were enigmas. A normally functioning crystal subject to focused prayer can be driven berserk. Still further prayer can see it destroyed outright. In death, a crystal bequeaths its will into the next generation. That new crystal will grow over millennia, eventually bestowing its blessing upon the world as its predecessor had. The Angel 14. It was after he finished speaking that Lord de Rosso noticed the pendant Agnes wears, reeling at the sight. In her final moments, he said, the angel called him and the sage individually to impart her final words. Whatever she told him, he now gave only a meaningful nod before sitting upon his throne and going silent. The Vampire Gallery 13. As he prepared to depart the castle, victorious over Lord de Rosso, Edea asked him one last question. It almost seemed he had been expecting the question. Why had he and the sage forgiven her father's betrayal? Why do they aid the Templar even now? He offered a glimpse into a history we could never have imagined. Parting Ways 1. The angel vanished, Lord de Rosso went to hiding, and the sage rose within the Orthodoxy for his defeat. Decades later, the first of the angel's omens came to pass with the Highland's rise. Luckily, the second, a worldwide plague, did not follow, though the two redoubled their watch over the crystals nonetheless. Parting Ways 2. The next 1700 years passed in peace, save for a handful of man-made crises surrounding the crystals, until 30 years ago. Again, the Highlands rose, and a decade later, the angel's second omen struck. With the great plague of reality, the sage and Lord de Rosso knew the coming of the chasm was nigh. They began to gather an army. Parting Ways 3. They would calm the crystals and prevent the great chasm's coming, even if it meant striking the temples and claiming them by force. To spearhead this force, they reached out to a former cleric of the Orthodoxy, the Templar. Together, they readied what preparations they could for the coming crisis. Parting Ways 4. But a problem emerged within the halls of the Orthodoxy's head temple, brought on by base human desire. To restore their quickly eroding authority, they planned to invoke the Grand Ritual, a forbidden rite to trigger the explosive release of energies long built up within the Earth Crystal. Parting Ways 5. As a former cleric, the Templar knew the danger such a rite held for the crystal. He begged Lord de Rosso and the sage to send their forces to strike the head temple immediately. The debate raged on among them. Should they focus on the Great Chasm's arrival and allow the ritual to be performed, or would the rite itself summon the chasm? Parting Ways 6. Ultimately, the Templar unilaterally chose to march against the Orthodoxy that day, 15 years ago. It was not the tale of betrayal we had been told. Lord de Rosso spoke to Edea as if addressing her father directly. They backed him, he said, because they believed in his tireless resolve and in his action. An update to the Crystal Orthodoxy. The Orthodoxy's dark past. The Crystal Orthodoxy was born 2400 years ago as a peaceful reformation of Crystal Adventism, also known as the Old Faith. While the crystals were once held individually by kings and other powerful figures, they were brought together into the unified faith. But the need to legitimize the new institution soon led to a campaign to discredit the old, robbing Crystal Adventism of its rightful place in history. An update to the Duchy of Eternia. Duchy Government. A kinsman of the kings who once ruled Eternia 2,000 years ago was chosen to rule the duchy as its Archduke, but all administrative, judicial, scientific, and medical functions, as well as the 4 divisions of Eternian forces, are under the control of the Council of Six, the duchy's highest governing body. Land of Immortality. The duchy's medical facilities all receive healing waves via the white magic cables. Dubbed the Land of Immortality, Eternia has all but banished sickness through the latest medical advances, and people in countless numbers wish to come to this seemingly enchanted land. Keystones. These 6 mysterious stones must be gathered before the tightly sealed door of Vampire Castle will open. An update to Dee's journal, Altinus' journal. Dropped by the Dark Knight Altinus dim as he fled, it looks exactly like Dee's journal from the outside. Even inside, many of the writings are strikingly similar. It's almost as if... Pillar of Light. It is said that when all 4 crystals have been awakened, A pillar of light will appear somewhere in this world. Known as the Holy Pillar, it radiates with the first light, divine source of life and the origin of this world and the heavens above. Aerie claims that if she brings her brooch within the Holy Pillar, its divine light will sweep away all darkness and banish the great chasm from the world.